HOA filled my ranch pathway with concrete. Now I turn their homes to swamps. My ranch was my Eden, until the HOA Karens poured concrete over my wildflower path and declared war. Now, their manicured lawns are sinking into swamps, and I'm the one holding the hose. The sun bled red over my Montana ranch, painting the wildflowers in hues of fire and rebellion. I'd spent a decade nurturing that pathway, lupines, daisies, and columbines woven into a living tapestry that sang of freedom. But the HOA, those clipboard-wielding Karens from the new subdivision across the creek, saw my paradise as an eyesore. They called it unkempt. They called me uncooperative. Then, one dawn, I woke to the grind of machinery and the stench of wet cement. My flowers were gone, smothered under a gray slab they dared call progress. I stood there, boots sinking into the earth, my heart a furnace of rage, and swore they'd pay. My name's Eli Carver, a third-generation rancher who never bowed to anyone, let alone a pack of suburban despots. The HOA president, Karen Whitaker, was the ringleader, hair sprayed stiff as her spine, lips curled in a smirk that screamed control. She'd moved here from some gated community in California, dragging her rules and her minions like a plague. Her neighbor, Karen Hensley, was her echo, always nodding, always scribbling complaints about my disorderly land. They wanted uniformity. I wanted my flowers back. The battle lines were drawn, and this wasn't just about a pat, it was about roots, legacy, and the right to live free. That night, I sat on my porch, whiskey burning my throat, staring at the concrete scar cutting through my land. The HOA's letter sat on the table, smug in its legalese, property improvement for community standards. Improvement? They'd killed a piece of my soul. My grandfather planted those flowers, taught me their names as we walked the path under starlight. Now, it was a sterile strip, a middle finger from people who'd never touched dirt they didn't buy in a bag. I crushed the letter in my fist. If they wanted war, I'd give them one they'd drown in. The next morning, I drove to the county office, digging through records like a man possessed. The HOA's land, their precious cul-de-sac, sat on a floodplain, a detail they'd conveniently ignored when they built their cookie-cutter castles. My ranch, higher up, controlled the creek's flow through an old irrigation gate my great-grandfather built. The gears in my mind turned. Water had carved this valley long before their SUVs rolled in. It could carve again. I didn't act rashly. Revenge needs patience, like tending a garden. I started small, attending their HOA meetings, playing the part of the reasonable neighbor. Karen Whitaker presided like a queen, her gavel a scepter, while Hensley and the others nodded like trained dogs. They droned about mailbox heights and lawnmower decibels, oblivious to the storm brewing in my chest. I smiled, nodded, and memorized every detail of their lives, their schedules, their sprinkler systems, their perfect little worlds. Weeks passed, and I worked in secret. The irrigation gate, rusted but sturdy, was my weapon. I oiled its hinges, tested its flow, and mapped the creek's path. It could flood their backyards without touching my land. I wasn't just planning revenge, I was crafting justice. They'd buried my flowers, I'd bury their lawns in mud. But I needed a trigger, something to make it undeniable. That's when Karen Whitaker overplayed her hand. She showed up at my gate with a new demand. My barn, a weathered beauty of cedar and history, was non-compliant with their aesthetic code. "Tear it down or face fines," she said, her voice dripping with triumph. Behind her, Hensley clutched a clipboard, eyes gleaming like she'd already won. I laughed, a low, dangerous sound that made them flinch. "You want my barn?" I said. "Come take it." Whitaker's smirk faltered, but she doubled down, threatening lawsuits. That was her mistake. She'd pushed me past reason, into a place where only reckoning lived. I spent nights rerouting the creek, digging subtle channels under moonlight. I studied their drainage systems, weak from their own corner-cutting construction. The HOA's homes were built on sand, figuratively and almost literally. One good flood, and their basements would be ponds, their lawns a quagmire. I wasn't just fighting for my path, I was fighting for every rancher, every dreamer, every soul crushed by their sterile rules. The wildflowers deserved vengeance. So did I. The day of the flood, I woke before dawn, the air heavy with the promise of rain. The gate creaked as I opened it, water rushing like a free beast. It followed my channels, silent and relentless, pooling in their cul-de-sac. I watched from my hill, heart pounding, as the first Karen screamed from her patio. Whitaker's voice cut through the chaos, barking orders no one heeded. Mud swallowed their manicured grass, water seeped into their lives. Hensley's SUV sank into the mire, her clipboard floating like a sad raft. I didn't smile. This wasn't joy, it was justice, cold and unyielding. By noon, their neighborhood was a swamp. The HOA meeting that night was chaos, residents shouting, Whitaker blaming everyone but herself. I sat in the back, silent, my boots still damp from the creek. They didn't know it was me. Not yet. But whispers spread about the rancher who'd warned them, about the land they'd underestimated. I felt no triumph, only a hollow ache. My flowers were still gone, and no flood could bring them back. The swamp was just the beginning, a muddy gauntlet thrown at the feet of the HOA. Karen Whitaker's face, red and twisted as she stood ankle-deep in sludge, was a portrait of defeat I'd savor for years. But victory is a fickle beast, it bites the hand that feeds it. I'd won the first battle, but the war was far from over. The HOA wasn't a snake you could kill by cutting off its head, it was a hydra, and every Karen had a clipboard and a grudge. By the next morning, the cul-de-sac was a disaster zone. Waterlogged furniture sat curbside, and the air stank of mildew and desperation. I leaned against my fence, sipping coffee, watching their cleanup crews slog through the mire. Whitaker stormed from house to house, rallying her troops, her voice shrill enough to curdle milk. She didn't know I was the architect of their ruin, but suspicion hung heavy in her glances toward my ranch. I met her gaze once, my eyes steady, daring her to prove it. She looked away. I'd expected chaos, but not the fallout in my own chest. My grandfather's wildflowers were still gone, their colors now just memories I traced in the dark. The flood had been cathartic, but it hadn't filled the hole they'd left. My ranch felt quieter, the silence heavier. I'd struck back, but at what cost? The creek babbled on, indifferent to my questions, and I wondered if I'd become the villain in someone else's story. The HOA retaliated faster than I'd anticipated. A week later, a sheriff's deputy knocked on my door, holding a summons. The HOA was suing me for negligent water management, claiming I'd caused the flood. The audacity burned, they'd buried my path in concrete, and now they dared paint me as the criminal. The summons listed damages, flooded basements, ruined landscaping, even Whitaker's prized koi pond, now a muddy grave. I read the numbers, thousands piling on thousands, and laughed bitterly. They thought they could bankrupt me. They didn't know I'd fight until my last breath. I hired a lawyer, a grizzled old-timer named Hank who'd grown up on a ranch like mine. He smelled of tobacco and justice, his eyes sharp as a hawk's. They've got no proof, he said, spitting into the dust. But they've got money and spite. This'll be a dogfight. I nodded, my jaw tight. I didn't care about the money, I cared about the principle. They'd taken my flowers. I'd taken their pride. Now, it was a matter of who'd break first. The town buzzed with gossip. At the feed store, old-timers whispered about the swamp rancher, who'd humbled the HOA. Some slapped my back, others avoided my eyes, wary of picking sides. The Karens, meanwhile, spun their narrative, I was a reckless loner, a menace to their perfect community. Whitaker led the charge, her voice dripping venom at town hall meetings. Eli Carver's disregard for progress threatens us all, she declared, her followers nodding like a choir. Progress. The word tasted like ash. My path had been progress, life growing where concrete now choked it. I doubled down, refusing to let their lies take root. I started attending every HOA meeting, my presence a silent challenge. Whitaker hated it, her gavel slamming harder each time I walked in. I'd sit in the back, arms crossed, letting their complaints wash over me. Hensley once tried to confront me, waving a photo of her flooded garage. "You think this is funny?" she snapped. I leaned forward, voice low. "I think it's poetic." She paled, retreating to Whitaker's side. The room felt smaller, the air electric with unspoken accusations. But the fight wasn't just public, it was personal. My sister, Mara, lived in town, close enough to the HOA's reach to feel their pressure. She'd always been the peacemaker, urging me to compromise. "Eli, let it go," she pleaded one night over dinner, her eyes tired. "You're tearing yourself apart." I stabbed my fork into my steak, harder than necessary. "They tore me apart first," I said. "They don't get to win." Mara sighed, her hand reaching for mine. "What's winning if it leaves you alone?" Her words stung, but I shook them off. Alone was better than defeated. The lawsuit loomed, discovery dragging on like a slow bleed. Hank dug into the HOA's records, uncovering shoddy permits and ignored floodplain warnings. Their homes were built on lies, and he was eager to expose it. But the Karens fought dirty. One night, I found my barn vandalized, red spray paint screaming, "Flood freak," across the cedar. I clenched my fists, imagining Whitaker's smirk behind it. I didn't report it. I didn't need to. The paint was a badge, proof I'd hit a nerve. Then came the turning point. A whistleblower, a nervous HOA treasurer named Greg, slipped me a file at the diner, his hands shaking. "They're hiding something," he whispered, glancing over his shoulder. The file detailed Whitaker's side hustle, skimming HOA fees to fund her own landscaping business, the one that poured my concrete path. It was a bombshell, proof of corruption that could flip the lawsuit. I thanked Greg, promising to keep his name out of it. His eyes were haunted. "They'll ruin me," he said. I understood. The HOA didn't just fight, they devoured. I took the file to Hank, who grinned like a wolf. "This'll gut them," he said, already drafting motions. But I felt no joy. Greg's fear mirrored my own, the kind that gnaws at night when the world's too quiet. I'd wanted justice, but this was turning into something uglier, a vendetta that left everyone scarred. Still, I pushed forward. The wildflowers deserved it. My grandfather deserved it. The court date arrived, a gray morning that matched my mood. The courtroom was packed, HOA members glaring from one side, ranchers and locals on the other. Whitaker took the stand, poised and venomous, spinning tales of my reckless endangerment. Hank tore into her, presenting the floodplain evidence and Greg's file. Gasps rippled through the room as the judge's gavel fell, ordering an investigation into the HOA's finances. Whitaker's face crumpled, her empire cracking. I should have felt triumph, but all I felt was exhaustion. That night, I walked the concrete path, now cracked from the creek's overflow. The lawsuit was tilting my way, but the victory tasted hollow. Mara's words echoed, "What's winning if it leaves you alone?" I'd turned their homes to swamps, exposed their corruption, but my flowers were still gone. The ranch felt like a ghost town, my own anger the only thing keeping me company. I knelt by the path, touching the cold concrete, and whispered an apology to my grandfather. I'd fought for him, but I'd lost something too, maybe the part of me that knew when to stop. The courtroom victory was a spark, not a fire. Whitaker's empire was crumbling, but she wasn't done. Neither was I. The investigation into the HOA's finances had exposed her skimming, but it also unearthed a deeper wound, one that cut straight to my family's heart. Among the documents Hank uncovered was a land deal, buried in fine print, tying the HOA's development to a betrayal I never saw coming. My grandfather's best friend, Old Man Tate, had sold a parcel of our adjoining land to the developers years ago, knowing it would hem me in. The Karens weren't just outsiders, they were pawns in a game that started before they arrived. I sat on my porch, the file trembling in my hands. Tate was dead, but his betrayal lived in the concrete scarring my ranch. He'd been like an uncle, sharing whiskey and stories with my grandfather under these same stars. Why? Money? Envy? The answer was gone, buried with him, but the pain was fresh. I felt like a fool, fighting the HOA while the real wound was closer to home. The wildflowers, my grandfather's legacy, weren't just killed by concrete, they were sold out before the first shovel hit the dirt. Whitaker sensed my distraction and struck. She rallied the HOA, painting me as a vengeful recluse who'd flooded their homes out of spite. They filed a new lawsuit, this one for emotional distress, claiming my sabotage had traumatized their families. It was laughable, but their money made it dangerous. Hank warned me the case was weak but could drag on, bleeding me dry. "They're betting you'll fold," he said, chewing his cigar. I wouldn't. Not now. Not when I knew the truth about Tate's deal. This wasn't just about flowers, Anna Marie, it was about reclaiming what was stolen. I went to war with a new plan. The creek was my ally, but I needed more. I started talking to the locals, the ones who'd watched the HOA bulldoze their way into our valley. There was Clara, the diner owner who'd lost her garden to their community standards. There was Miguel, whose fence they'd torn down for obstructing views. They were tired, angry, and ready to fight. I organized a meeting at the diner, the air thick with coffee and resentment. "We take back our town," I said, my voice steady. "No more Karens, no more concrete." Nods rippled through the room. For the first time, I wasn't alone. We hit the HOA where it hurt, their image. Clara spread word through her customers, Miguel through his church. We dug up every violation the HOA had buried: shoddy construction, unpaid contractors, even Whitaker's fake permits. We plastered it online, on flyers, anywhere eyes could see. The Karens fought back with glossy brochures and tearful interviews, but the town was waking up. Their perfect cul-de-sac was a lie, built on greed and betrayal. My swamp had been the first crack, now we were shattering their foundation. Whitaker didn't take it lying down. One night, I caught her and Hensley on my land, sneaking through the dark with cans of herbicide. They were poisoning my fields, trying to cripple my ranch before the next court date. I grabbed my flashlight, its beam pinning them like roaches. "Get out," I growled, my shotgun resting on my shoulder, not aimed, but a clear warning. Whitaker's eyes blazed, no trace of her usual smirk. "You're finished, Carver," she spat. "This town will bury you." I stepped closer, voice low. "You buried my flowers. I buried your lawns. Wanna see what's next?" They fled, leaving their poison cans behind. I burned them in a bonfire, the flames licking the sky like a vow. The final court date was a circus. The courtroom overflowed with locals, ranchers, and even a few defected HOA members. Whitaker took the stand, her voice trembling with rehearsed tears, but Hank was relentless. He presented Tate's land deal, the HOA's fraud, and photos of their herbicide cans. The judge, a no-nonsense woman with roots in the valley, wasn't swayed by Whitaker's act. She dismissed the emotional distress claim and ordered the HOA dissolved for fraud. Cheers erupted from my side of the room, but Whitaker's glare cut through me. "This isn't over," she mouthed as she left. I should have felt free. The HOA was dead, their lawsuits gutted, their cul-de-sac still a muddy ruin. But as I walked my ranch that night, the concrete path underfoot, I felt nothing but weight. Clara and Miguel celebrated at the diner, but I didn't join them. Mara called, begging me to come to town, to let go of the fight. "You won, Eli," she said. "Come home." But home wasn't the ranch, Anna Marie, it was a battlefield, scarred by my own hands. The creek still flowed, but it carried my anger, not my peace. The final blow came quietly. A letter arrived, not from the HOA, but from a developer offering to buy my ranch. The price was obscene, enough to start over anywhere. They'd been watching, waiting for me to break. I realized then that Tate's betrayal wasn't just a story, it was a blueprint. The valley was changing, and I was the last holdout. My fight with the HOA had made me a symbol, but symbols don't last. I burned the letter, but its words lingered: sell, or be swallowed. I walked the path one last time, the concrete cold under my boots. I'd turned their homes to swamps, exposed their lies, but at what cost? The town saw me as a hero or a villain, but never just Eli. Mara had moved away, unable to watch me destroy myself. Clara and Miguel had their own fights now. I was alone, my ranch a monument to a war I couldn't stop fighting. I knelt by the path, digging at the cracked concrete with my hands, searching for a trace of the wildflowers. There was nothing, just dirt and regret. In the end, I didn't sell. I stayed, tending a ranch that felt more like a grave. The creek still flowed, the valley changed, but the wildflowers never grew back. I'd won the war, but lost the part of me that knew why I was fighting. The swamp I'd made wasn't just in their yard, it was in my heart, a bitter, muddy thing that drowned everything I'd loved. I looked to the stars, where my grandfather used to point out constellations, and whispered, "I'm sorry." The wind carried it away, unanswered.